by a bent line, by a straight line, by a crooked line. The Crooked Path, a podcast for modern cunning folk with Peter Pagan. Hello and welcome to The Crooked Path. My name is Peter Pagan and tonight we're going to be taking a look at tapping the bone. But first let's take a look at some news. This coming Sunday, October 6th, is Pagan Pride Los Angeles, and we're going to be there. So if you're interested in coming and seeing just how crazy I am in person, or just coming down and laughing generally, it's a good time to do it. As I said, it's this Sunday, October the 6th, and it is at Rainbow Lagoon Park in Long Beach. That's on East Shoreline Drive. And the zip code for you to type into your GPS is 90802. And we'll be vending there all day with Pendragon Publishing, selling our books and also pottery, glassware, jewellery and other curios. And at 11 AM I will be teaching Visceral Magic in 10 to 3, so that's something to put in your calendar, I guess. There's going to be a whole lot of cool things going on there. Raven of Raven's Flight is going to be there with her absolutely incredible incenses and bath products and all the other cool stuff that she does. So I heartily recommend stopping by for a visit. And you know, there's entertainment and other workshops too. There's this crazy guy called Tony Mierzwicki who knows a thing or two about Greco-Egyptian magic. You might want to take in his workshop too. So let's talk about law. So, I say so a lot, don't I? Tonight's topic, Tapping the Bone, is all about recovering lost law. And you may be asking yourself, what is lost law? Why do we want to recover it? And how come we lost it in the first place? Well, there's several reasons why there's lost law to recover. First of all, people are really lazy about writing stuff down, especially when the majority of the population doesn't write or read. And consequently there's a lot of stuff that got passed by oral tradition that got passed on from generation to generation for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years until somebody met up with a zealous missionary. Whether that was Christian or some other pagan belief, the Romans were pretty good at putting people to death. And every time you have somebody slaughtered by an invading army or missionaries, that's the end of a piece of oral tradition, because whatever they got told, they're not going to pass on anymore. And if they were the only person who were told that thing, then it's tough luck for anyone else looking for it. But there are a lot of other reasons. There's a lot of arguments in the modern pagan community about lineage. People claiming descent from this, that or the other. And the one thing that you can say with absolute certainty is there is no such thing as an unbroken lineage. It just doesn't happen. Even where you have a family tradition that is passed down from generation to generation, it tends to get fragmented because you're talking about a small number of people essentially playing telephone. That's Christopher's phone is deciding to be very vocal. Apparently it has some law to share with us, and he's gone to hide and listen to it, and he'll pass on the important facts to us later.
Sorry.
That's all right. We know what you're like.
It just started talking.
Yeah. So even where there is tradition being passed down within a family, because of the small set of people, you get a lot of stuff that goes missing when somebody dies before they get to pass it on, and so law within a family gets fragmented, and consequently there's always missing bits to find. Gerald Gardner is famous for reconstructing Wicca, well, constructing Wicca, let's be perfectly frank about it. He created Wicca out of the fragments that he received from the New Forest Coven, and then proceeded to fill the gaps with whatever seemed to work, borrowing from Freemasonry, Theosophy, Aleister Crowley, the shamanic traditions of various indigenous cultures around the world, and sometimes just getting his friend Doreen Valiente to make up a nice poem to fill the gap. And it came together beautifully, and it is a wonderful tradition. No, don't get me wrong, I'm not knocking it at all. But just like every other tradition that exists today, it was put together from pieces. And so a large part of the work of any modern tradition working today, especially in the realm of traditional witchcraft, such as the tradition that I follow, a lot of the work is involved with trying to recover that lost lore. Because, first of all, there's always a curiosity, so how the hell did they do that stuff? And there's tantalizing clues that make you want to go and find it. And so we tend to spend a lot of time looking for stuff. Another reason why lore gets lost is not to put too fine a point on it, Christianity. Christianity came to Europe with the Romans, and the Romans came to Europe, and then they got religion and brought Christianity along as well. And in the British Isles in particular, this meant that there was a lot of interesting things going on, because we actually had two waves of Christianity hit the British Isles. The first wave was St. Columba, and it resulted in what we now know as Celtic Christianity. Basically, St. Columba and his missionaries turned up in the British Isles and were immediately welcomed by the Druids, who saw a kinship. There are a lot of things that they saw that made them think that these were brothers from another church, however you want to call it, because there was a lot of ideological similarities. They had the concept of the Trinity. Christian concept of the Holy Trinity sat very well with the Druids because they had trinities of everything, or as they called them, triads, and that's not the Chinese mafia, just in case you were wondering. I don't think the Chinese mafia were active in Britain in like the 1st century AD, but you never know, they did get around a bit, and the Brits were fond of trading far and wide. But the main thing here was that because the concept of threes was very important to the Druids, they liked the idea of the Holy Trinity. They had a deity who was a born-again, a slain and risen god, a sun god, who was known as Hu or Ezu. Ezu isn't too far away from Jesus. You could say, oh, they just pronounce it funny. And there were lots of other things, but they thought, oh yeah, we like you. And so Celtic Christianity rose up, which was a wonderful amalgamation of early primitive Christianity and the Druidic religion of the Celtic Britons. And this worked very well until the Romans discovered Christianity. When the Holy Roman Empire decided that they were all Christians and stopped feeding the Christians to the lions and started being Christian themselves instead, they weren't very happy about these Celtic Christians. In fact, they were more upset about the Celtic Christians in Britain than they were with the pagans. And so they set out to eradicate the Celtic Church, the Church of the Chaldees as it was known, some part of that time. And basically what happened was that the Celtic Christianity disappeared. However, bits of it ended up in Roman Christianity. The concept of monasteries, the concept of pilgrimages, the funny haircuts that monks wear, all came from the Celts. And in fact, on the Isle of Lindisfarne to this day, the church on the Isle of Lindisfarne, although it's Anglican, Church of England, they still use a lot of the old Celtic ways of reckoning things. They do all their rites of passage with the tides. Like they will do christenings as the tide comes in, and they will do funerals as the tide goes out, literally the tide on the beach. And everything is done to either the daily cycle or the yearly cycle, the wheel of the year. So they're very closely hooked into the seasons and to the times of day, which is really cool, I think. But one of the things that happened, because Christianity had this strange two-wave entry into Britain, it allowed the mystics to prepare the mysteries. And what happened is you basically had two different ways that stuff got preserved. The stories, the oral traditions that had been passed down from generation to generation, needed to be preserved in some way. And so a lot of the druids and the bards became monks in the new Christian church. And there's two ways this went down. In Ireland, the stories were written down over a great length of time, and they were mixed quite thoroughly with Christianity. And so you have the stories of St. Patrick. It was indeed a Christian bishop, but a lot of his stories actually have a lot of pagan connotations into them. The stories of Cahulan and the Dagda and all the others were basically told as histories. And you have the Book of Invasions, which tells you the stories of the invasions of Ireland, which has a lot of the lore tied in, and they were copied down by the monks because they thought it was history. And that worked very well at one level, because the stories were preserved. On another level, it didn't work so well, because it's very difficult to filter out the Christian influence from those stories. In Wales, however, which was the other main centre of Druidry in Britain, the most important Druid teaching centre in the whole of Europe, was on Ynys Môn, the Isle of Anglesey. And they took another angle with this, because they didn't want to take so long to get it done, largely because they had been somewhat worse treated than the Irish Druids were. I can't remember the exact date, but there is a plaque on the beach of Amlwch on the northwest coast of the Isle of Anglesey that commemorates the day when 6,000 Druids, men, women and children, having finally been defeated by the Romans, turned and walked into the sea rather than be taken into bondage, and they sacrificed themselves so that they might die free. And I'll tell you, it's a very potent and powerful place to stand, looking out over the sea where they did that. But as a result, the Welsh are passionate people, in case you hadn't guessed. And they took a very different tack with preserving their stories. The Druids and the Bards became monks and wrote the things down, and rather than taking their time over it, they wrote them down all in one go and slapped Christian beginnings and endings for the stories. So the stories came to us a bit more fragmented because they were done in a rush, and some people missed bits out and some people duplicated other people's work, and so it's not as neat and tidy as the Irish tales, but it's really easy to separate the Christian bits, because the poems, they would tack a verse on at the beginning and a verse at the end that praised God, and left the rest pretty much intact in the middle, which makes it a lot easier. Good old Welsh. I like the Welsh. You probably noticed that. I'm just a teensy bit biased. So anyway, so there's a lot of stuff that was hidden in plain sight, if you will, in the stories that were recorded by the monks through the first couple of centuries of the new millennium, as it were. And so we have the advantage of having those available, and some of them, the Welsh ones, ended up in the Mabinogion, which is a great book. This particular version, if you want to go recovering lore, this is a great book to recover lore from the Welsh Celtic mysteries, because it's not just, the Mabinogion is a collection of stories. It's the word Mabinogi comes from Imabinogi, which is a collection of children's stories, and it was originally translated, and I have a facsimile version here, by Lady Charlotte Guest, a Victorian lady, very prim and proper. And she was a lousy translator, but the one thing she did that was truly magnificent is that this version of the book, which is not very well translated, but she managed to retain the poetry of it. And those of you who have been following my podcast for a long time will know that the poetry is very important. It's the poetic thinking that really holds a lot of the mystery. And so it's a good book, but as I said, it's not a very accurate translation from a linguistic point of view. And so we come to this one, which I held up first, which is a translation by Sinead Davies of Cardiff University, and it is generally considered to be the most accurate translation of the Tales of the Mabinogion there's ever been, because she was actually fluent in both ancient and modern Welsh, and I grew up with these stories. Being of Welsh ancestry, I heard these stories as a wee laddie, and so I've been very familiar with these stories for a long time. And when I got this version of the book, I learned things that I didn't know. They are the most complete, most accurate, and she retains the poetry as well. Very magical book. So if you're going to buy a copy of the Mabinogion, this is the version I recommend. It's out in paperback now, so it's a lot cheaper than when I bought this one. But heartily recommend it. So, where does the lore come from? It comes from the ancestors. And that's where we recover it from a lot of the time. When we work magically to recover lore, we're generally working with the ancestors. And why do we work with them? Because they've got the lore, and because they have a vested interest in working with us. A lot of modern neo-pagan traditions work primarily with the gods, and they don't do a lot with the ancestors at all, except for at Samhain, at Halloween. And that's a real shame, because there's a couple of things that are really special about working with ancestors, and one of them is that, well, let's say you've got a court case and you want some help to make sure that you don't go to jail or don't get fined, or that you win the case if it's a civil case and somebody has to pay you instead of vice versa. Well, there's this one little niggling problem if you go to the gods for help with that. They'll give you justice, and it may be that justice isn't what you want. If you want to get out of paying that traffic fine, that traffic ticket, but you actually ran the red light, then gods aren't going to help you. Ancestors, on the other hand, will, because they have a vested interest in your success, because they live on through you, and so they will help you pervert justice, as it were. I know it doesn't sound very ethical, but sometimes it's a case of, okay, I know I did wrong, and I will pay the coin for this, but I need that coin to not be 6 months in jail. So you call on the ancestors, help me get out of this, and I will pay the coin in some other way. And usually they will find a way to make you pay it forward, which is a lot nicer than sort of keeping inanimate objects between you and Bubba, which is a whole different mystery. Don't know about you, but I'm fond of not encountering that particular experience. And when we talk about working with the ancestors, we're not talking about calling up Great Aunt Maud in a seance. Are you with us, spirits? Knock one for yes and twice for no. Oh. We're talking about working with our most ancient ancestors, usually from so far back that there aren't really any names anymore. You just call on the ancestors. And this works really well. Sometimes you have a more recent ancestor who's interested in helping you. For example, my father was a practicing ceremonial magician and witch, and every so often I get input from him. But most of my interaction with ancestors goes way, way back. They all talk funny like that, see? Because they're all Welsh. It's funny, my Norman, Irish and Polish ancestors don't tend to get involved very much. Well, maybe one or two of the Polish ones. I can imagine this old Polish granny going, "Oh, you want to put this out in your soup?" But mostly it's I think they've decided that my Welshness is paramount, which is kind of ironic because my mother is Welsh. I mean, born, bred and grew up in Wales. Spoke Welsh as a lass. And her brothers and sisters spent my formative years tormenting me because I was one of the first members of our family to be born in England. I mean, of all places in the world to be born, England. They made fun of me unmercifully, and laughed a lot at my attempts at speaking Welsh as well. I remember as a 10-year-old kid speaking fluent Welsh, but I'm sure it wasn't anywhere near as fluent as I remember it. And I know they laughed, they chuckled a lot when I spoke Welsh, which is probably a clue that it was probably less pristine than I thought it was. But I thought I was brilliant, me. And so yeah, we tend to work with the more ancient ancestors, and they're the ones with the cool lore anyway. You get back to the ancestors who come from pre-Christian times, and they are going to be chock full of lore. Mystery in every bite. So, other than working directly with the ancestors, and I will talk a little bit on how you do that in the practice section, but what other ways can we recover lore? Because obviously you have to start somewhere. And one of the best sources are fairy tales and nursery rhymes. There's a whole bunch of really cool ones. I mean, those of you who regularly take in this crazy little podcast will be aware that my coven is called Briar Rose, which is the original name of Sleeping Beauty. And sure enough, the original fairy tale of Sleeping Beauty has a lot of lore in it, and is a very magical story. There's also a whole bunch of nursery rhymes. There Was a Crooked Man is one that springs to mind. In fact, even Aleister Crowley recognised the value of nursery rhymes in Magic Book 4, that most famous book that he wrote. There is a chapter that doesn't have a number somewhere in the middle of the book, which is called an interlude. And it is a Kabbalistic exploration of nursery rhymes, and he goes into Hickory Dickory Dock and Little Bo Peep and a whole bunch of other nursery rhymes, analysing them using gematria and notocharia and a whole bunch of other Kabbalistic techniques to pull out the occult lore that is concealed within them. And then he finishes, the very last sentence of the chapter is, all of this is of course bunkum. Or is it? But there is a lot of lore in fairy tales and nursery rhymes. And of course, in the myths and legends, the tales of the Mabinogion for the Welsh, the invasions of Ireland for the Irish, the Brits kind of lose out. The English don't really have a lot of their own stuff, but you still have the stories of Woden, Wayland Smith, the stories of Stonehenge and Merlin, the Arthurian legends. So there is actually quite a lot there, but it's just, for some reason or other, they always seem to get discounted by people. It never ceases to amaze me. One of the reasons why Tolkien went to the Baltic myths and legends, the laws of Northern Europe and Eastern Europe, to provide the inspiration for the Lord of the Rings, is that he didn't consider the British myths and legends to be of any value, which is really sad, but that was the prevailing attitude of the time when he was writing. Nowadays we have the Celtiad, Celts in Space, by what's her name?
Scanlan Kurtz? Or Patricia Keneally Morrison?
Yes, Patricia Keneally Morrison, the lady famous for claiming to have been secretly married to Jim Morrison. But the books are good, even if she's a little kooky. So you know, attitudes change, fashions and cycles come and go. But by actually looking at the tales, the myths and legends of the gods and heroes of your culture, you can actually pick up a lot of lore, and that's a very good starting point. The trick is to learn how to look at it. And I'm not going to go into detail on that today, because we've done that at great length in other episodes of the podcast. So go look them up. I encourage you to go and play in the archives. But another way is just following your intuition. One of the saddest things, in my personal opinion, that has happened was the way that Iolo Morganwg was treated. Iolo Morganwg was a guy in the 17th century who brought back the Eisteddfod, the bardic contest. And he was almost single-handedly responsible for the Druid revival. But he very quickly got sidelined because he is to this day considered a fraud and a faker. Fraud and a faker, because they accused him of forgery. He wrote a book called The Bardas, not to be confused with The Badass, which it also could have been called, which is a very thick book that has a lot of information about what the Druids did. It has tales, legends, it has practical stuff on herb lore, it has the Celtic triads, you know, the three most singular poets of the island of Britain are A, B and C and stuff like that. The three most crazy knights in the Round Table were Huey, Dewey and Louie. No, that was a different tribe. But also a lot of practical stuff on philosophy and magical lore. The entire sum of what we know about the Colburn is in the Bardas. The trouble is, somebody asked, he wrote the Bardas, and it was supposed to have been compiled from a collection of texts that were in private collections that he had access to. And when people said, well, what are these texts? Let us see them. He said, I can't do that. I was told I could use the information, but I'm not allowed to tell you anything about who has them, what they're called, or who wrote them. And so everyone cried, fake, fraud, and he was disgraced. And to this day, the modern Druid orders, the Order of Bards, Obeits and Druids, uses a lot of his material whilst deriding him, because it got spread into other areas, and so they use the secondary sources to avoid using his name, but they're still using it. But the whole thing is really silly, because there's three possibilities here. The first one is that he is a fake and a fraud. The second possibility is that he told the absolute truth, and he had access to these documents, but he wasn't allowed to give details about them, and therefore, in keeping his word, he was unable to prove the value of what he had. And then the third option is that he was actually incredibly connected to the ancestors, and this was all recovered lore. That because of his own insecurities, he tried to pass off as from documents. What he meant was from ancestors. The fact is that the information stands, and the practical aspects of it function, they work. So what does it matter if he pulled it out of his backside? It's lore that works, and I refer to the Bardas frequently because it's a great source. I always test everything. I don't just sort of take everything as gospel. I always, you know, check out the practical stuff, try it out, discuss it with other people, and look for additional sources to back up the concept. But I don't discount it, because I don't think the fact that he may have written it completely out of his own imagination is necessarily a bad thing. There's an awful lot of stuff in our tradition that comes out, if you want to call it that way, comes out of the imagination of the initiates of the tradition, because we recover lore by tapping the bone and connecting with the ancestral memories. And there's no piece of paper to point to with that either. So, you know, we just don't try and cover it up by saying, oh, I got it from this ancient document. We say, I got this from this ancient ancestor instead. It shuts people up then, because they can't ask for the paperwork. Your papers, please! So following your intuition is not a bad way to start. Start with the stories, the myths, the legends, the fairy tales and nursery rhymes, and then move on to where your intuition tells you to go. And eventually you're going to find yourself talking to the ancestors at some point. So let's have a look at some ways of talking to your ancestors in the practice section. So the main thing about practically tapping the bone and recovering lost lore is that you need to connect with the ancestors. And there's a slight difficulty in that the ancestors we're talking about have been dead and gone for a very long time, and if you're like me, you live quite a long way away from where they were as well. I mean, I'm halfway around the world from my ancestors, although ironically it was coming here that enabled me to encounter them in the first place. So yeah, distance isn't necessarily such a barrier. But you want to look at what we're basically talking about is recovering ancestral memories. And I need to explain a little bit of background that's going to sound a bit like a diversion, but it isn't, it's actually all tied in, so bear with me. Let's talk for a moment about reincarnation. A lot of pagans believe in reincarnation. They believe that when you die, you get a brief vacation in the Summerland to work through any remaining issues, and then you get reborn as a new you. And you know, in the 60s it was very popular in this area in Los Angeles to go to come as you were parties where people would dress up in costumes representing people they thought they were reincarnations of. It's amazing how many Cleopatras and Julius Caesars there were. Nobody complained too much because Cleopatra costume generally was sparkles, gauze and not much else. So nobody really put down Cleopatra number 7 because they were too busy ogling her cleavage. Or Julius Caesar's calf if they were otherwise inclined. But, yeah, calf. Yeah, with those short kilts, they were looking at his calf. Yeah, right. But the problem is that modern neo-pagan concepts of reincarnation have been largely lifted from the Western version of Hinduism. The New Age, especially in the 60s with the guru the Beatles were with, Maharishi Yogi, and all the other gurus that came from the East, they found a ready market of people wanting to learn transcendental meditation and other kinds of meditation and being deep and mystical and Eastern, because people always tend to gravitate to the exotic. It's one of the reasons why the British mysteries, the myths and legends of England, were largely ignored until comparatively recently, because they were domestic, they were local. Oh well, you know, Stonehenge, it's just there, isn't it? I mean, I lived 3 miles away from Stonehenge. The house I was born into was literally half a mile from Stonehenge. I used to ride my bicycle to the stones and play in them. Nobody really thought a lot about the stones. They were there. They were somewhere, before they put the fence around it and started charging admission, it was somewhere you went for a picnic. Because it was convenient. There was this stone that you could lay your picnic cloth on, and it acted as a table, and you didn't have to sit there with ants crawling through your cake. And so people tended to sort of, you know, and I'll never forget visiting Dumfriesshire in Scotland, which is actually where my father's family comes from. And you couldn't go for a walk without tripping over a stone circle somewhere. I mean, we literally in one day visited 30 stone circles. And so you tend to sort of take them for granted when they're just littering the countryside. Whereas all this great mysticism from the Far East, the Hindu and Hinduism, Buddhism, and Tantra, and all the other Eastern philosophies that were being brought back in the 60s by people who were traveling and exploring, were fascinating. So people got really caught up in them. But despite people's at the same time having something of a disdain for the people of those regions, you know, the actual Hindus were looked down on quite a lot by the Western people who were taking up yoga and finding a guru and painting symbols on their foreheads and wearing saffron lot. Despite the disdain that Westerners had for the culture outside of this exotic philosophical stuff, we're talking about a culture that's existed for a very long time. I mean, Hindu culture has the same ancestry as the Celts. The Indo-European ancestors of our Celtic ancestors are the Aryans that were the ancestors of the Hindus as well. And so this culture has had a long time to develop, and therefore it is very complex, a lot more complex than most Westerners think. And reincarnation is a concept that is grossly oversimplified in the West. In the New Age and Western Hindu movement, They teach a very simplified version of reincarnation, which is basically you die, you have some R&R, and then you come back in a new body. Whereas the Hindus themselves actually don't believe that. They believe in the fragmentation of the soul. The idea that we don't come back as a discrete entity, but that we are a bunch, we are like a cloud of soul pieces, and each piece of that soul cloud goes into a different entity and is incarnated. And then on death they come back together, share their knowledge, and then spread out into a bunch of other people. So we don't incarnate as a discrete entity that gets reused. It's not like recycling bottles where you just rinse them out, or thoroughly rinse them out hopefully, and then put something else in them. It's more like recycling plastic bottles, where they get melted down and reused to make different things. And I've actually had an argument with somebody who considers themselves to be a well-educated Western Hindu, who insisted that this can't possibly be the way that Indian Hindus believe, despite the fact that it's actually fairly well documented, to the point that there's even a best-selling book or series of books called the crap, I never remember. It's not the Secret Teachings of Oversoul 7, is it?
I'm sorry?
The Oversoul 7 book, it's
The Education of Oversoul
The Education of Oversoul 7, which is exactly about this process, written as a novel. It's actually a very good book, I recommend it. And it's a trilogy as well. But, so basically, reincarnation just doesn't work the way that most modern neo-pagans think it does. To use the terminology of my Welsh Celtic ancestors, when we die we get a brief period of reflection, and then when we're ready we go back in the cauldron. We get put into the cauldron of rebirth, where we are melted down into the cosmic soup, broken down into our components, and then when a new soul is required for a new body, it's like the ladle goes in and scoops out whatever bits land in the ladle, and that is poured into a new person. And this continues until we do something that qualifies us to join the ranks of the mighty dead. And the mighty dead are those who have, through great spirituality, warrior prowess, artistic ability, or teaching ability, or some other great skill or ability, have earned the right. So they still go in the cauldron, they just don't break down like the rest of us. They remain intact and are reincarnated to be the teachers and the leaders of future generations. So you would say that Buddha, Jesus, Krishna, depending on your political leanings, Gandhi, the Beatles. No, just kidding. But people who are the great teachers are the mighty dead, come back to guide us and to provide us with continuity. But not everybody gets that. You have to earn the right to be reincarnated as you, basically. So what happens when you get past life memories? I do past life regressions. I haven't done it for a long time, but I used to actually facilitate past life regressions for clients many years ago back in England. So what are people experiencing? Well, what they're experiencing, and this is my opinion and the opinion of a lot of people who think like me, but it's not everybody's opinion, so you are allowed to disagree with me, but my opinion is what we think of as past life memories are actually ancestral memories, because the memories of our ancestors is stored in our blood. Well, that's the traditional way of putting it. In a more modern sense, you might say that it's stored in our DNA. There is a lot of DNA that doesn't serve any practical purpose as far as modern science can discern. It's referred to as junk DNA because it doesn't appear to have anything to do with our physical body. But the esoteric theory is that this junk DNA is where the ancestral memories are stored, and this is the collective unconsciousness of Jung. It is the ancestral memory, it is what you tap into when you connect with the ancestors. And basically, within each of us, we carry the memories of each one of our predecessors up to the point, obviously, you carry the memories of your father up to the point where you were conceived. You carry the memories of your grandfather up to the point where your father was conceived. So you don't tend to remember their deaths, but you do tend to remember their lives, or at least significant portions of it. If you happen to have Loretta Lynn as your grandmother, you may have a problem, because she was only 13 when she gave birth, and then her daughter was 13 when she gave birth, because they were hillbillies. So you're not going to have a lot of really quality ancestral memories at this end of the tree, but going further back, hopefully a little better. But these are the memories that we work on tapping. So how do we do that? Well, there's one technique that's very simple, and it's relatively safe, and so I'm going to share it. It does require you to have a guardian or a patron deity. A deity that you work very closely with, or a guardian spirit of some description who can act as a gatekeeper for you. And it's a very simple technique. The first thing you have to do is use your favorite technique to go into trance. Now, once again, there are podcast episodes on getting into trance, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about that now. But basically, open yourself up, get into a trance state, just open yourself up. And then you want to set your guardian angel, guardian spirit, patron deity, or whatever terminology you're using, as a gatekeeper, and open up a gateway at the base of the skull, literally where the spine goes into the skull at the back. You picture a doorway, a gateway opening. You can think of it as one of those nice little arch, stone arch with a nice heavy wooden oak door that opens like that, and then your guardian stands there to make sure only nice people come in. And you invite the ancestors to step in, and then you just, in your altered trance state, wait and see what comes. It's very passive, but it can be very effective. It sometimes takes a while to get going if you're not used to doing it. But and it helps if you work in groups. You can. In my tradition, we tend to work on this together, where we all do the exercise together, and then we speak, and we either record the whole session, or we have somebody acting as a scribe, scribbling madly, trying to keep up. Or you get one person to do it, and the other people listen and ask questions, and get the information that way. But it can be a very rewarding way of working, and a lot of times we go into it with an idea of an area we want to cover based on lore that we've picked up from a story, from myths, legends, and so on and so forth. And then we basically, when we've gone as far as we can with the mundane research, we then go and tap the bone, open up the ancestral gateway to converse directly with the ancestors and see what memories we can trigger and bring back in that way. It's very short, very sweet, very simple, and it works really well. So that's pretty much it for this week. Hope you found it interesting. If you haven't, tough. There'll be another one along next week, which may be better. You never know. But until then, this is what you're stuck with. So thank you for listening. If you're in the area, I'd love to see you at Pagan Pride down in Long Beach on Sunday. And if not, well, in November we'll be in New Orleans for the Folk Magic Festival. So maybe I'll see you then. Have fun. Take care.
By a bent line, by a straight line, by a crooked line. The Crooked Path, a podcast for modern cunning folk with Pagan.